about that from Dr. Dax Driver, the President and CEO of the Energy Chamber of Trinidad and Tobago. He has pioneered numerous new initiatives and activities for the Energy Chamber, including the Safe to Work program and the Learning Center. He is the immediate past chair of the Caribbean Chambers Network, and he was previously the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Economic Development Board. I'll hand over to you, Dr. Dax, for your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, and bring greetings from Trinidad and Tobago in the southern Caribbean. Trinidad and Tobago, the home of Calypso, Steel Pan, Limbo, and oil. I think it's not a very well-known fact that Trinidad and Tobago is actually the first country in the world where oil was drilled for. 1866, there was a well drilled for oil here in Trinidad. It was managed by a guy called Walter Darwin, Captain Walter Darwin. And interestingly, his great-grandchildren own a company who are still members of the chamber here in Trinidad. So we have this long, long history in the oil and more recently in the gas industry. So literally, oil is what has run our economy. If I could have the slides, perhaps go to my first slide. So Trinidad and Tobago is very reliant upon the oil and then more recently the gas industry, the oil industry throughout the colonial period. Since independence in 1962, gas has played a very important part in our economy, petrochemicals, methanol, ammonia, and then since the 1990s, LNG. We were a first mover in LNG in the Atlantic Basin, and that has created a lot of wealth in the country. So you'll see our GDP per capita is double the average for Latin America and the Caribbean. And that has been driven by oil, gas, and petrochemicals. But you also see that there's a boom and a bust. There's times when we've grown strongly and times when our economy has contracted. So we grew strongly on the back of oil prices in the 1970s, had a very rough period in the 1980s. Early 2000s, the LNG industry took off here, grew very strongly, and it's been some rough periods since. So you have that boom and bust, which is a feature, I think, of a lot of oil and gas, petrochemical type economies. The fossil fuel industry, broadly drawn, including the petrochemicals, accounts for around 35 to 40% of our GDP. So it just shows you how reliant upon that sector we are. For government tax, about 50% of government tax comes directly from the sector. It does obviously vary from year to year depending on pricing and on production levels. But then crucially, exports. 80% of our exports are the oil and gas commodities, LNG being the major one, crude oil, methanol, and ammonia, the big petrochemicals. In terms of jobs, the industry doesn't provide many direct jobs, about 15,000 jobs in our economy, which is about 3% of our labor force, but they're well-paying jobs. And the other thing that the sector does is it creates a lot of skills, and people then go and work internationally. So it also creates that ability for people to go and work around the world. The other thing that the sector has done, the gas industry has done, is produced very low-cost electricity for us. Our electricity sector is 100% from natural gas. We have great penetration. Every household in the country have almost 100% penetration of electricity, and it is at a cheap level. So that has been very useful for households, and industry has benefited from that as well. So within the Caribbean, manufacturing sector is also fairly dominant in sectors like the light manufacturing sector, and that competitiveness is in part driven by that low cost electricity from natural gas. The challenge of that is we are very energy inefficient because electricity is cheap. We tend to waste it. So we are actually an energy efficient economy, and we waste a lot of electricity. The cost is kept low because basically there's a cross subsidy on the pricing of natural gas going to electricity from the rest of the gas sector, which also has created some issues for us as well. We are, because of our reliance upon the oil and gas and petrochemical sector, we are obviously extremely aware of the challenge that we face because of the energy transition. We know of the changes which are happening around the world, how capital markets are driving investment, and the challenges that is facing for our economy, and it's something which we're acutely aware of and obviously we're following very closely. So if we go to the next slide, please. So what is the future that we look at? Trinidad has been relatively successful in terms of diversifying our energy sector. We went downstream of natural gas, very early. We used the electricity to move into heavy industry, and we moved very crucially into petrochemicals, into ammonia and methanol. I'm sitting here in the hub of our petrochemical industry, and we're major global players in ammonia and in methanol. So we were successful at monetizing the gas resources we had, unlike quite a lot of countries who have gas resources who haven't managed to monetize them. So our reserve to production ratio is around 10 years. I think a decade ago that looked like a weakness. I think right now with the energy transition, that might look like a strength, that it's unlikely we're going to have large stranded reserves. But one of the things as well that the industry did is as I talked about, we subsidized other sectors, and that has not always been very successful. So we subsidized our sugar industry heavily, like a lot of the Caribbean. We had a sugar industry which was not particularly productive, had high costs, but we continued to subsidize it for years until we decided we couldn't do so any longer in the early 2000s. And we removed the subsidies from the state-owned sugar industry, and it collapsed. And just on the outskirts of the industrial estate here, there's a big sugar factory which is gently rusting into the ground. Through cheap electricity, we also supported the steel industry, and that was successful for many decades. But in 2016, with low steel prices at that time, and very inflexible labor market conditions and an intransient union environment, which we've also developed, that industry could not be sustained, and our biggest steel plant closed. Hopefully, it may restart under different structure. But these are the sort of challenges that we face. And then more recently, our refinery. We have, obviously since the beginning of the 20th century, we've been refining in Trinidad. 2019, state-owned refinery was mothballed and it was closed. The cost basis of that refinery was just too high. It had twice the labor force that comparable well-run refineries around the world have, and labor rates would double the rates of other sectors in our economy, and that refinery is now closed, obviously with major job losses. So a lot of people, I think, are saying, is this our future now? Is it that we're going to see this deindustrialization happening as the energy transition takes hold, and the world moves away from fossil fuels? Capital is not available for investment, and this, I think, is a key question which is in many people's minds. We say in the Energy Chamber, we say no, that there is still a future for us, because of some of the things which some of the other speakers have been talking about earlier on. So get the next slide, please. We believe that we can repurpose our existing assets that we have and our strengths. So, we're a major LNG producer, and we can repurpose that into lower carbon LNG, with the offsets, as you're seeing happening in other places. That can also happen here. But also, because we have this very long history in the oil industry, we have a lot of mature oil fields, depleted oil fields. So there's a major opportunity for carbon capture and sequestration right on the doorstep of our LNG facilities. So you have these point sources of CO2, and you have depleted oil fields very close to them, and there's a major potential in those areas. We know that to make low carbon LNG, we have to, there's all the activities within the LNG value chain that you have to make sure you're decarbonizing. Methane leaks, obviously, a major issue, which is high on the focus here, just to reduce any methane leaks. To make sure we are, flaring. Trinidad has been a leader in reducing flaring, because we've used the natural gas that we've had. We've been very successful in that, starting with electricity, then going to petrochemicals. But there's still other opportunities to further reduce flaring and to gather methane from all the little locations along our gas infrastructure, and bring that into the network. So it's that focus on reducing leaks and using every molecule efficiently. Marine fuels is also a major opportunity area. We're already seeing Trinidad-based producers using methanol in shipping. There's big potential in ammonia, and obviously we are a good potential location for a hub for LNG and shipping as well. So we see the marine fuels as a major opportunity area which exists, particularly if we can create a greener ammonia through then going on to the next box. They have hydrogen. Obviously, I think everyone is looking at opportunities in hydrogen. I think there's major opportunities here in the country. Obviously, Trinidad is a major market for hydrogen within the petrochemical facilities. So the ammonia plants could be a major off-taker for green hydrogen. There's an active project which is being developed in the country at the moment to produce green hydrogen from heat, which is currently wasted from power generation and from solar energy, which we have a major project in development to feed that into one of the existing ammonia facilities to reduce the carbon footprint of that ammonia and to produce a greener petrochemical. We think that that's a major opportunity area which exists, and I think we're well positioned, being a hub for the ammonia industry and having a potential for renewables and having other sources of electricity which are available for green hydrogen, and obviously with the carbon capture for blue hydrogen as well. So that is a major area which we see as huge potential for the country as we go through this transition. And then if we just go to my final slide, the last point I wanted to make, though, is that the infrastructure is important, but as actually what's more important is the skills that we have and the people that we have. Trinidad has done a good job at developing a skilled labor force. Here in the petrochemical sector, 99% of the labor force is a local labor force. We've done that by a real strong focus over many decades in skills development. Actually, the sugar industry developed quite a lot of skills, which were then came across into the petrochemical sector. Just sort of skilled workers from the machine shops have had good apprenticeship programs, and that's been a strength. We know the numbers. I run a safety program where every individual has to come through our center, so we know the numbers very well of labor force, and we do a good job there on local content. That means we have the skilled labor force who is available then to be part of this transition. We have world-class project delivery. We construct, we fabricate offshore oil platforms and gas platforms here in the country. Obviously, there's a huge amount of engineering skills which need to do those, create those massive structures. And those are then the skills which you can then transition into offshore wind or other renewable energy projects, and just that ability to deliver large projects. We have some of the world's major multinationals present here in the country. So we also can leverage off their skills and their knowledge and their ability. So right now in Trinidad, we are in the final stages of putting together a project which will be the largest solar energy project in the Caribbean, producing the cheapest solar in the Caribbean. And that's happening because we have the resources from the major multinationals here. Also, our local companies have that experience working with the multinationals. So our local companies know what it takes to work with these major global players. And the final point I make is that what gives me confidence in the future and our ability to see through this transition is our young people. We've done a good job at training people through our universities. We have a lot of strong engineering expertise. And when I meet young people working in the industry, they are so passionate about making this change that I'm just confident that despite the challenge we face, that we can adapt, and we've made changes before and we will make changes again. So thank you all very much. I look forward to your questions.